So I'm going to be giving the 101 on sustainability and beauty presentation. There's a lot to cover for sustainability. It's quite a nebulous topic, but I hope some of the information covered in this presentation will give you some of the tools so that you can start more effectively thinking about sustainability and incorporating this into a business. For groundwork, I think it makes sense to start by defining what do we mean when we say sustainability. So I'll take kind of a historical lens and then come to current ways we're thinking about sustainability and also corporate sustainability. In 1987 was the Brundtland Commission, where sustainable development was ultimately about meeting the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. That evolved to the triple bottom line, coined in 1994. So this Venn diagram that you often see still when people are talking about sustainability, that you've got the environment, economy, society, the triple bottom line. And when they all come together, then you have sustainability. That shifted to a nested model in 2006, where the orders of importance for the different layers of sustainability were addressed. Because you will have no society without the environment. So clearly, we need to prioritize keeping our resources intact. We would have no food to feed ourselves. If the earth is on fire, then what does society do? Then you've got the society. Without the society, you would have no economy. That evolved to, in 2010, the Natural Step Framework, a more scientific way of approaching sustainability, where it acknowledges the resources available on Earth to continue meeting the needs of human society. Within that framework is the resource funnel, that as our resources are declining and as our societal demands for those resources are increasing, what's currently happening, then the margin of action becomes narrower. It's only until we can start to open up the funnel by reducing, for example, our demand for resources or improving the resources that we have on Earth, that we can move towards sustainability. I think an important piece, sustainability is a moving target. It's not a endpoint, it's more about a journey. So you're never going to achieve sustainability. You're always striving for it. And things change also year over year. Resources are different within a business and also within societies. There's also the planetary boundaries, which was first conceptualized in 2009, looking at the various boundaries that we need to operate in on Earth as society. For example, we've got like climate change or land system change. Have we crossed the boundary so that it's now unsustainable and it's a risk for societies? Fast forward to 2023, 6 boundaries are crossed. So currently, the way we are doing things in society, when we're looking at the planetary boundaries perspective, not great. You probably also saw the Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs. These were launched in 2015. So holistically looking at sustainability, especially the social aspect, there's lots of other ways we can think about sustainability, but these are a good starting point, I would say. And then the business context. There's been kind of a shift to approaching sustainability in a business from doing less bad, reducing your impacts, to shifting to doing more good, less bad and more good. There's a business case for sustainability. Clearly, I don't know if I have to tell anyone this at this point. Consumers are willing to pay more for products that they perceive to be more eco-friendly. Incorporating sustainability into your business has an advantage for sales. I will also say, alongside, there has also been an uptick in greenwashing. So clearly there is an opportunity. Consumers want more of this, and without, I would say, good governance or good regulations or policy to keep businesses in check, a lot of companies will greenwash. There's more regulations coming out now to address greenwashing. So this is important for you guys, especially as new brands, to be mindful of. You don't want to greenwash because you can, especially into the future, get in trouble. But there certainly has been opportunity to take advantage of this trend where consumers want to purchase green. And so I'll just highlight the 7 sins of greenwashing by Tara Choice. The 7 sins include hidden trade-offs. So you've switched to paper and you're saying that it's inherently better than plastic. There are trade-offs. Higher greenhouse gas emissions, for example, may be associated with producing those packages. No proof. So maybe you are just saying that we are investing in sustainable development in our company, but you have no data to support that. So how are you going and doing that? Vagueness. Maybe you say green. What do you mean? Or sustainable. What do you mean? False labels. So maybe you're using some obscure certification that has no merit, but you're saying, hey, look, we've got this certification. Irrelevance. Maybe you say that you're sulfate free for a product that's not a wash off product. Not relevant. SLS, not relevant to non-wash off products generally. Lesser of two evils, and then fibbing, like downright lying. So there was this report from Tara Choice in 2009 to highlight the frequency of these sins. The most common claim was a mix between no proof and vagueness. I would say the elephant in the room for sustainable business that we should be mindful of when, especially we're communicating sustainability as a business, is that in the time we started to think about sustainability and requiring companies to start, for example, measuring their greenhouse gas emissions have only gone up. Today, most studies agree overconsumption is a key issue. So clearly, if we're in a consumerism-based industry, can these products actually be sustainable if we're encouraging more consumption from consumers? And the overwhelming evidence also shows that overconsumption has canceled out any of the gains brought about via green innovation. So sustainable consumption rather than green consumerism. Those are two different things. Sustainable consumption is about consuming less. As a business, you can think about this though. How do I incorporate these ideas in my business? Well, maybe you can think about having a streamlined product line where you have fewer products, staples that your customers can use and they don't have to use as much. You can also think about this from the lens of you're purchasing as a business when you're choosing raw materials. If you're consuming more materials, then that's going to have a greater impact. So maybe streamlining also formulation, so formulations and product lines, and also having conversations with your consumers about the need to consume less. What can we do in the consumerism space that we operate in when these words, consumerism and sustainability, just are kind of at odds with each other? Well, you can have these conversations openly and try your best. And here I'll just do a rapid fire of common sustainability misconceptions. So the idea that natural equals greener. There are a lot of issues with natural materials, from wild harvesting, which is a significant threat for biodiversity and like species extinction, especially for the crops that might be overcultivated, to adulteration, to illicit trade, to land use issues, according to the 2019 IPBES report. Biodiversity loss was most impacted by the expansion of agriculture. I'm not saying that natural never is greener, but the blanket statement just clearly doesn't work. Or that organic equals greener. A lot of this is for the same kind of reasons as why natural doesn't necessarily equal greener. There's also research showing that agricultural styles in certain contexts that require more land have a greater environmental impact. Or that plastic-free equals greener. Yes, there are large issues with pollution and also with our recycling infrastructure. There are also issues with greenhouse gas emissions. So if you're using packaging materials that translate to higher total greenhouse gas emissions, is that material actually better? For example, you're using glass. It requires more energy for you to transport. It also requires more material. It's also more intensive to produce the glass. Is that better? In some cases, it may be, but not in every case. There's no panacea for sustainability in packaging. That waterless equals greener? What are you replacing water with in your formula? When you look at formulation LCAs, the most impactful part of formulations typically is the emollient phase of the formula. So if you're replacing water with emollients, is that actually better? And just because you have less water in your formula doesn't mean that translates to less water usage for the product in general. So if you're making some, for example, oil cleanser with this waterless claim that requires more water usage for your consumer, is that better? Solid, if this product requires more water from your consumer, is that better? In light of the fact that when you look at LCAs for products, the most impactful part of most, especially wash-off formulations, is the consumer use phase, particularly with their warm water usage. And so I will highlight an LCA that was done a couple of years ago on toothpaste tabs versus toothpaste. It was for this reason that they found that the toothpaste tabs were actually counterintuitively more impactful, or that refillable equals greener. It's a nice idea, but it really hinges for this to have an impact on consumer compliance, consumer accessibility. So if you have a refillable system in a city and people have to drive in from out of the city, what's the impact of the transportation if your consumer is to get to you? Are they likely to continue doing that? If you have a cartridge system that requires your customers to ship back their cartridges, what's the impact of shipping the cartridge to and from rather than the customer just buying a monomaterial PET packaged product? Ultimately, this is why we can't just assume, because often our assumptions about sustainability, as I've highlighted, are incorrect. If we want to do better, we actually have to measure things so we understand what's happening. The reason why I had this information is because people went out and measured it. Accounting is what keeps us all accountable. Otherwise, we're just shooting in the dark. How does one go about building sustainability into a business? The first thing to think about is just broad corporate sustainability management. In my opinion, that's where you start. You want to think about leadership commitment. So you as the founder are committed to trying to do better. You want to set goals and objectives. What are you trying to achieve within your business? Assess what your current practices are. So understanding where you are currently standing with sustainability. This will generally be from measuring impacts. For example, you might do an LCA and see the various impacts within the life cycle. So a life cycle assessment. We will get to it in future slides, but that is one way where you can start to account for what is currently happening within your business. Stakeholder engagement, you want the perspectives of your, for example, customers who are stakeholders. You want to develop key performance indicators to show you that you are actually making improvement, have a strategy to meet those targets, and then you're going to report on it and refine and continually improve. Some key points is that corporate sustainability management is iterative and it takes time to see results. With commitment and a well-structured plan, there's a big opportunity for meaningful impact. Sustainability is a journey and not an endpoint. You're not going to just say, I'm sustainable, because then you're patting yourself on the back like you've achieved sustainability, which, like, reality, you haven't. You're going to be continuously improving. You can always do better. It's really important to select a good reporting framework. For us to see who's doing better, it's really important that there's comparability for reporting. Using common reporting frameworks for companies is key so that the market can compare apples to apples and not apples to oranges, because you guys are reporting in a different way. You want your reporting to be verified by someone outside of your company, preferably a reputable auditing company. So here are some reporting frameworks that you can look to. There's current regulations starting to come forth for uniformity for reporting. That is beyond the scope of this presentation. Part of reporting includes identifying materiality. What's most relevant to your business into your stakeholders. So for example, are greenhouse gas emissions the most impactful thing that you are doing? Okay, well, you want to address that. And for reputable third-party audited companies, I would recommend personally EcoVadis. I think that they do really great work. I think a good reference for everything that I've just talked about comes from our last Sustainable Beauty E-Summit. It was by Audrey Wesson of Innolex. So she just highlighted the way that Innolex is approaching corporate sustainable management. Here are two snippets of their presentation. So we started with the broad corporate sustainability management. Then you start to get into the specifics for you going and developing products. Eco-design is one thing to think about. Eco-design is defined by activities within the design and development process that aim to reduce environmental impacts and continually, again, sustainability is a journey, not an endpoint, improve the environmental performance of the products throughout their life cycle. A life cycle perspective is really important. You also have to consider your manufacturing processes, ingredient substantiation from your suppliers, supply chain monitoring. You want to know your supply chain, reducing waste, streamlining ingredients, because every ingredient in your formulation has its own supply chain, and each supply chain adds to the impact of your product. Here is a depiction of the life cycle perspective, and this is a life cycle perspective specific to cosmetic products. So then from this eco-design life cycle perspective, how do you go about substantiating sustainability? Most importantly, probably for understanding the impact of your product, is a life cycle assessment. Essentially, you're just measuring the things within your system. You have to create the boundaries of your system. There's a whole conversation of what you're going to include within the boundaries of your life cycle assessment. And it's not just a one and done thing. You want to continually improve. So you understand the impacts now. What are you going to do to make it better? Just because you have a life cycle assessment done doesn't mean that you're like more sustainable or less sustainable. You just have somewhat of an understanding of your current impacts. It is quite expensive. There are some groups that are working to kind of democratize life cycle assessments for smaller companies. So one group that's doing this is Bluebird Climate. When you're starting to think about how am I going to afford this, they perhaps might be a good starting point. And now we've been talking a lot about how do you incorporate sustainability into your business? How do you go about and approach sustainability in product development and measure it? What are the regulations around sustainability? One example of sustainability regulation is related to packaging. There's a lot going on with packaging right now with EPR regulations. Extended producer responsibility. Ultimately, this is about shifting the responsibility from waste management to the producers of the waste. This was a map as of 2020. There has been a lot of progress since 2020. Current, at that time, regulations for EPR globally that companies had to comply to. And you might be thinking, well, I'm a small business, I don't have to comply. You do. And you might also think, well, those regulations are in this other state. That's not my state. Are you selling online and is your product available to those customers in that other state? There's also regulations around post-consumer recycled plastic, requirements for a certain percentage of PCR material to be incorporated into your packaging. There's also the European Green Deal. Here's a timeline of what is going to be happening. Some things to be mindful of is, like, for example, evidential support required for green claims. There might be LCA requirements for specific green claims. Another regulation, I mean, this is more guidance at this point, but we'll see how it lands in the next few years, are the green guides by the Federal Trade Commission. I will say there are comparable guidance or regulations in the European Union and also in Canada and also like globally. So you just have to be mindful of the regulations and guidance in the region that you're selling in. The green guides by the FTC, they're published every 10 years, and they give guidance for what they consider deceptive. Generalized claims were broadly considered deceptive. Eco-friendly, because What do you mean? Non-toxic? Anything can be toxic. It depends on the dose. So what do you mean? These are unsubstantiatable claims. If you want to make a green claim, you have to be specific and you have to prove it. So instead of saying we're sustainable, generalized deceptive claim, what are the steps that you're taking to become more sustainable? And clearly there is a lot to keep on top of in terms of sustainability regulations. You as a company are required to keep on top of them. So I'm just going to give a plug to trade associations globally. They are there to help companies understand what's happening in the market that they serve. For indie companies in the United States, the trade association that would be probably most relevant to you is the Independent Beauty Association. They represent small to medium-sized companies across the spectrum of cosmetics, including indie brands. And they do a really good job at tracking regulations, but also advocating for sound legislation. It would also be worthwhile hiring a consultant that has specific expertise here just to make sure what you're doing is compliant with the regulations, and probably hire them early on to make sure that you don't make any expensive mistakes that you're going to have to fix down the line. I hope this presentation was helpful. It's now time for Q&A and we can continue on. I'll try my best to answer all of your questions. Thank you so much for your time and attention.